Welcome to StopFake, the place where we identify fakes and debunk them to set the record straight on disinformation about Ukraine. I'm Marko Suprun with this week's stories. A majority of Ukrainians consider the Donbas conflict a civil war. Crimea beats record for number of tourists, and using the army to return Crimea to Ukraine. Did the deputy minister really say that? Let's get to the details. In a tried-and-true manner, pro-Kremlin site Ukraina.ru distorted the words of a European political analyst and declared that the majority of Ukrainians do not believe Ukrainian authorities' statements about Russian aggression in the east of the country, and 63% of them consider the conflict to be a civil war. In fact, Simon Weiss, a fellow at the German think tank Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, said that most Ukrainians, 63%, would like to see a regional rather than an international approach to solving the conflict in the Donbas. Speaking at a national experts forum held in Odessa and sponsored by the Ukrainian think tank the Gorshainin Institute, Simon Weiss spoke about the necessity of finding ways to solve the eastern conflict. Most Ukrainians do not support the idea of peacekeeping missions in the Donbas. They would rather see a gradual transformation of the area into an island of regional cooperation with a focus on humanitarian aspects, Weiss said. Weiss also said Ukrainian society has become used to the conflict in the Donbas, and that is why it is time to talk about creating institutes to reintegrate the war-torn areas back into the Ukrainian fold, either through the help of peacekeepers or by expanding the areas that are free of Russian militants. No matter how much Russian propagandist media claim that Ukrainians think the war in eastern Ukraine is a civil war, polling data tell a completely different story. The most recent sociological survey about the Donbas conflict, conducted by Kyiv's most reputable polling institutes, Democratic Initiatives and the Razumkov Center, asked what needed to be done for peace to return to the Donbas. The largest number of respondents, 32%, said force Russia to stop interfering in the Donbas conflict. Taking stock of this year's vacation season in Russian-annexed Crimea, Moscow's occupation authorities declared that the 2018 season beat all post-Soviet records with more than 6 million visiting the Ukrainian peninsula. This happy news was immediately hailed by all manner of pro-Kremlin media. Crimea's so-called tourism minister, Vadim Volchenko, bragged that the number of tourists to Crimea grew by 29%, a record figure for the post-Soviet era. But he did not specify with what year he was comparing this alleged growth. Volchenko also claimed that 1 million Ukrainians had crossed the border into Crimea during this year's holiday season. Official data, however, tells a different story. According to Krimstat, a regional state agency that gathers all manner of data and statistics that is now subordinate to the Central Russian Statistics Office, 141,000 Crimean holiday sites received 481,600 vacationers in 2018, with 94.5% of the holiday makers coming from the Russian Federation. Compared with 2017, the amount of tourists visiting Crimea grew by 11.3%, Krimstat reported, a far cry from the 29% Volchenko was boasting about. Now, according to Ukraine's State Border Service, some 2 million crossed the border between Ukraine and Crimea in 2018. The service also reports that traffic from Crimea to the Kherson region bordering the peninsula is growing by 3% annually. The border service noted 1.4 million Crimean-Ukraine border crossings during the May-September holiday season, 690,000 into Crimea, 713,000 from Crimea. Ukraine State Border Service spokesman Oleg Slobodyan says Ukraine-Crimea traffic for June 2018 decreased by 6% compared with 2017, so there is no basis for the claim that growing numbers of Ukrainians are going to occupied Crimea for vacation. Fake stories about increased tourist traffic to Russian-occupied Crimea are a staple Kremlin narrative that StopFake has debunked several times. Ukraine's Deputy Minister for Information Policy, Emine Japar, wants to return Russian-annexed Crimea by using the Ukrainian army. At least that's what Russian media declared this week. Ukraina.ru, Rambler, and others claim that Japar was advocating a military plan for the return of the peninsula during an October 22nd press conference. Japar did touch upon the theme of returning Ukrainian jurisdiction over Crimea, but she did not speak about using the army to accomplish that goal. She simply said that Ukraine had to be ready for every eventuality, use all means to reclaim Crimea, and be prepared for whatever unpredictable steps the Russian Federation takes regarding the peninsula. StopFake asked Emine Japar to respond to Russian media treatment of her words. The political diplomatic approach for the return of Crimea is being implemented, but there is not enough discussion of other possible scenarios, Japar explained. Quote, "I am not calling for a war, but Ukraine as a state and as a society must be prepared for different scenarios for the return of Crimea, she said. Japar is used to her words being twisted by the Russian media. 1/3 of Russia's news is dedicated to Ukraine, and all Ukraine news is presented with a negative slant, Japar said. Twisting what she actually said and misrepresenting her meaning entirely is an example of how Moscow turns its people against Ukraine and Ukrainians, Japar explained. Fake stories about Crimea and euphoria about unification with Russia regularly appear in pro-Kremlin media, as do fake stories about Ukraine's military plans to take the peninsula back by force or wage acts of sabotage. StopFake has debunked many of them, and many more are sure to come. That's it for this week. You can find more dissected disinformation on our website, StopFake.org. Look, be vigilant, and don't consume fakes. As always, if you spot any disinformation about Ukraine, send it to us for a truth autopsy. I'm Marko Suprun, and this is StopFake. Thanks for watching.